Hey, I haven't been to the house in a while to record the episode. We haven't been to your place in a while. But I just got a quick question. Like, that dog that's out there, that's new?
Well, he comes around when the moon is full.
Okay, yeah, I'm noticing that.
Yeah.
So he bit me.
Oh, that's not good.
I'm all right. It's a little grazed. But it's just like, I'm a little concerned. I don't want, if that's someone's pet, I don't want to,
you're going to want to look out for full moons
Sure,
yourself now.
sure. Why am I so...
It's
just,
and
I don't...
I know you've always wanted a beard, and you're going to get one.
What?
You're going to get a nice big beard.
No. That's not how it works. The hell's happening? This sounds like it's a new episode of Nothing New, a Remake podcast. Hello, I am your co-host, Justin Quizon. With me, as always, is...
Hi, I'm Andrew Linde.
Okay, and today, this month, this is actually back-to-back episodes of Scary Monsters, because we did
Yes.
we did Nosferatu last month. And we don't usually start the year with back-to-back monsters, but they did give us a new film in the remake world of Universal Studios, and we have started this show doing movies discussing Universal Studios.
It's our origin.
It is our origin, yeah. Nothing New Origins is the movie title at that point. Anyway, but we do have a special guest in the room. Andrew, want to go ahead and...
Yes, Antonio Carlotta. Say hello.
Hi. It's so good to be here. That intro was better than I ever could have anticipated.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
We're so glad to have you with your expertise. People might know you from your show, Universally Yours, or
Universally Me.
Yeah, that's the one. Sorry.
Me.
Yeah. So we're very glad to have you here. Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's good to be here.
Okay, and of course, if you couldn't tell from my goofy intro, the movie we'll be discussing today will be The Wolfman from 1941.
And Wolfman from 2025.
Let's get rid of the...
Get rid of and combine the words.
That's right.
It's a real... They made some little changes there. Just a little difference.
So before we jump into the actual full book movies, let's kind of go into everyone's first exposure to the Wolfman, Universal version of Wolfman. So Antonio, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, now I'm trying to think of the first time I ever watched it. I mean, for sure years ago. But I guess later compared to the other Universal monsters, because my family has roots in the original Universal monsters. They made, Dracula, Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, those ones. The Wolfman was after their, what we call the Laemmle era of Universal. So that came a little bit later.
Pause on that. Let's go ahead and address that in case the audience actually doesn't know. Why don't you go ahead a little bit about your personal history with Universal? This is what I've always found fascinating about you. So go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah, my great uncle Carl Laemmle started Universal Studios back in 1912 on the East Coast, 1915 in the spot it is today. So some of his biggest accomplishments, of course, starting Universal. He won a Supreme Court case against Thomas Edison. He also saved hundreds of Jewish refugees in the 1930s. Wow. So he's a pretty cool guy. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, maybe the most exciting stuff to dig into is he started the Universal monsters. So like I said, Phantom, Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, the Invisible Man, the Mummy, and then the Wolfman and Creature of the Black Lagoon, which are included in the Universal Monster Legacy. Those came after him, but of course, I don't think would exist without him.
They're part of the family, essentially.
Yes, yes.
And just to get into your personal history, when did you personally get interested in Universal Studio monsters?
I've always been into creepy things and scary things, but I didn't have a sense of my Universal legacy until I was in high school or a little after. So my direct connection to those monsters didn't come until then. Okay. But then once I started watching them, and especially once I started learning how each of those monsters has kind of a social commentary attached to them, they have these deeper messages behind them, then I started really loving those monsters.
Amazing. Now, again, you don't actually remember when you watched The Wolfman.
No. And I'll be honest, werewolf movies are not always my favorite monster movies in general. I don't know it might just be like the hyper masculinity of some of those movies doesn't personally draw me in. But I do, obviously, I love like the Lon Chaney Jr., Wolfman. We'll get into the 2025 Wolfman.
Sure, we will. Andrew.
Yeah, I think most people start with something like Frankenstein or Dracula, and then later on go into Wolfman. I personally love Creature from the Black Lagoon, so I think I watched Creature before Wolfman, but it's definitely one of those where I had seen all of the Universal monster films pretty early. I'll just say it right now. Wolfman also ranks a little lower for me in general. I don't know. Maybe it is a werewolf thing. I've always thought of Wolfman as kind of distinct from werewolves as a group.
Sure.
But it is, he is still part of that. The changing into, a beast, a wolf, and the whole thing with howling at the moon and whatever goes on there. But yeah, I think so. I mean, but I also love. There was the Frida Cinema in Santa Ana did a triple feature of I think it was Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman.
Nice. And
that was it feels right. Like he fits right in with all the rest. He's part of the family. So that was a very good time. That was a very good memory for me. But yeah, it's definitely one of those. The Wolfman comes a little later in the love of Universal monsters.
So for me, I love that you did there is a mild distinction between werewolf and Wolfman.
Mm-hmm.
So werewolves are actually some of my favorite kind of monster lore, like of all time. But I was thinking about it, when actual movies about werewolves, I actually have a very small, limited list of movies I love. There's the American Werewolf in London is kind of the only obvious one. But it's hard for me to love a movie that actually has a werewolf in it, despite the fact that I love the lore of it. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of with you, both of you. It's like Wolfman is one. Oh yeah, of course. But I didn't watch him first, second, or third. Mm-hmm. That was Dracula, Frankenstein, Invisible Man. Honestly,
yeah.
And I have to agree with you. I love Creature from the Black Lagoon. So it's not. It does make me realize that I'm not just held to the Lemley era. There are other monster eras that I love. Creature, if my family had made it, it might be my favorite. So yeah.
We'll probably have you back there for the Creature remake if they ever do that.
Wonderful. I think that would have been The Shape of Water.
That's touche. Fair enough. But yeah, Wolfman, he was such a late watch for me, and obviously fan of Lon Chaney and the makeup work and etc. The makeup work, obviously, we'll get to that more. But no, I never made the Wolfman a priority watch for a very long time until maybe 20 years ago. I'm like, I should probably get around to that one. So yeah, that is my exposure, and those are all our exposures. So why don't we go ahead and dive into the film?
Yes. So, you already mentioned Lon Chaney. It's mm-hmm. Lon Chaney Jr.
Correct. Yes.
Obviously, the connection to Lon Chaney Sr. He was the Phantom, mm-hmm. but Lon Chaney Jr. then picked up, the Wolfman, and then he went on to appear as Frankenstein and different, all. A lot of the other, the
he was
Mummy.
Alucard and Son of Dracula.
Right, the Son of Dracula. So he kind of, I like that there was that kind of roster of, it was Bela Lugosi,
right.
Boris Karloff, they all kind of swapped around, and of course they have their one. Lon Chaney Jr. is Wolfman,
right.
Bela Lugosi is Dracula. You go through them all. But what's interesting with the Wolfman, I always forget Bela Lugosi's in the Wolfman.
Yes.
Right, and he plays Bella. They just call him Bella. I'm yeah, it's there you go. Even before the whole idea of the monsters meeting each other, it's there's Bella's there to pass on. It's almost like he's passing on that legacy.
Quite literally, because he's the wolf that bit him. So yeah.
But yeah, do you want to try and summarize the plot of the Wolfman?
It's basically Lon Chaney Jr. plays Larry Talbot, and he's coming home to go visit his father in Talbot Castle. His father, played by Claude Rains,
the Invisible Man.
The Invisible Man. I was just gonna say, it's because we talked about Invisible Man in 2020, and it's hilarious to me. I was right, Claude Rains is in this as well, so he also is back on our show. Welcome back. And he's on your shirt as well.
With the quote that's on here is "Think of the options," which I guess that's his most famous quote. I think that's funny.
And Larry does kind of get involved around with the city, meets Gwen, and one night gets bitten as they were going to meet a fortune teller. Gets bitten by Bella the werewolf, and slowly starts realizing he's changing. And the movie's a nice 70 minutes, I want to point out. Mm-hmm. So we're pretty much at the halfway point.
So many of those movies are so short.
I know. It's kind of nice, especially when we have to do this show where we have to watch 2 movies. I'm like, 70 minutes. Great. I kind of want to... We brought up like Claude Rains, of course, again. It's interesting to see him back here in a slightly different position, where he's not the lead, and he's a really great supporting character.
Well, I feel like this is the kind of roles that Claude Rains had around, like, at that time. Like, he was like an older mentor, or like a very, suave man, and here it's kind of like all of that in one. He's like this master of this estate, like a very, proper gentleman. Mm-hmm. I like that we're seeing Claude Rains really do his like normal stuff, but he's in the middle of a monster movie.
Right.
Yeah. Normally he's like, romancing Betty Davis or something, but it's like here it's like he's like, my son's a werewolf. Like, uh-oh.
Also, as I was watching the movie, I was kind of making the joke, going like, I'm looking at like, Claude next to Cheney, and I'm like, my brain's going like, Larry got it. Yeah, I was gonna say. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I was like, did Larry get most of his mother's genes? Because he reaches several feet taller than Claude Rains.
Well, I also...
That's really the thing you have to suspend your disbelief for most in the movie.
There's another thing I had to suspend my belief in the movie, and I'll get to that. But overall, this first half is fine. Up until he gets bitten, it's fine. But when he actually gets bitten, then it starts becoming the Universal monster stuff. The werewolf. Oh, look, the mood starts getting cooler. There's all this fog. There's all these really great lighting. Before that, it's like, oh, sure, that's fine.
I will say, towards the beginning of the movie, the one scene I really like is when he first meets Gwen in the shop. Yeah. I actually feel like they have very sweet chemistry there. Mm-hmm. I like that one individual scene.
That's actually a good one. And I agree. He does kind of borderline, really push it.
Yeah.
But she seems to be into it.
Yes.
I like that, and I like her role, she helps run that shop. I think that's a very interesting. She's doing her own thing, and he kind of comes into her life, and that's where the silver tip cane comes from. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a very interesting way to pull her into the story.
Yes. Now, sorry.
I will say there's so much lore, things that we just take for granted as werewolf lore today that started actually with the 1941 Wolfman. So mm-hmm. There's, of course, the poem that they say about, the autumn moon is bright, the pentagram, I think silver, wolfsbane, all of that originates from this movie and not from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, which I think is really pretty fantastic because we would never anticipate that.
And it's funny because we just treat that as common knowledge werewolf lore, and it's now used throughout almost every other iteration. Even down to Monster Squad, where it's that some of those elements are even in there to kill off that war.
Totally, but it's no, Kurt Siodmak just invented that in 1941, and I think he wrote the script in something like 7 weeks. He just pumped this thing out, and now it's part of lore forever.
That's incredible. I want to talk about, of course, the the first transformation sequence. And it's let's talk a little bit about the process. Do you know much about the process of what they were doing at the time?
Well, so Jack Pierce was the makeup artist. He's the same guy that did Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, all of those. Jack Pierce was very meticulous in his process. He was a visionary. He was wonderful, but a lot went into his stuff. So I know that for Lon Chaney Jr., it was a 5 to 6 hour process. Every single day he was in that makeup chair. I know for sure they used yak hair for the Wolfman hair. I know it had to get singed with an iron every day because I know that Lon Chaney Jr. and Jack Pierce did not get along. I think Lon Chaney Jr. was fighting his own demons all the time. Jack Pierce, very curmudgeonly. He would often burn Lon Chaney Jr. as he was like singeing the yak hair with his iron. And Lon Chaney Jr. always thought that he was doing it on purpose. So I know that was part of the process. It was also an additional hour to get everything off at the end of the day.
That's crazy.
I don't remember all of the other techniques they used for the makeup. Do you have it?
Well, you know,
here?
I want to put something out. Like, here's a classic case of almost Mandela effect. I keep assuming we have a face-to-face transformation in this movie. I keep thinking that's happening. This is like the second or third time I watched it, and every time I watch it, I keep thinking, Larry, did I miss it? Did I miss the face-to-face transformation? And I realized like it actually never happens in this movie. We get the feet, and that's the clearest form of transformation. But outside of that, we actually don't get that. Like my brain's thinking of like, like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, or like Abbott and Costello meets. Those are the scenes I keep realizing. I'm blending those in this movie.
Right.
Those actually don't happen in this movie. I will point out the other kind of hilarious bit for me, and this is the suspension of disbelief I can pull so much. This is one where I'm like, I'm sorry, what? As I watched it this time. So we see the transformation of his feet, but before that, you see Larry kind of like take his shirt off, and he's like checking his chest, and he's kind of wearing an A shirt, and he's just like, wow, God, he's like scratching, and he's just like kind of exhausted, and he sees sit down. Then the transformation happens. Then we get to see the next scene of him in the woods, in that very classic monster movie. Yeah, like lurching about, fog everywhere. And then I realized
it was in L.A.
I know it's in L.A. Yeah. And then I realized he's wearing the shirt, the famous like Wolfman button up. But then I go,
Still to be proper.
right, I get that, but I'm like, so when did you put that on? Like, did you look in the closet and go like this one? No, I like this one. And then it's not ripped up because he's a Wolfman, right? But it's like very, very nicely buttoned. I think the shirt's even tucked in. You're right, though. Maybe it's like, but I am a Talbot, so I have to. I let that go after that, but I double checked. I can't be. No, that can't be right. Rewind. Oh no, he did take his shirt off. Wait, what? It's fine. It's fine.
I wonder if that was a conscious decision from somebody in costuming, or was it just overlooked?
I feel like, because like design-wise, I can imagine it's like, we're not going to cover him from head to toe in fur. So it would just be easier to cover it. Hands, face, feet. But I almost feel like that might have been an oversight when someone's like when they were filming that scene, and then they're all saying like, wait a minute, did he take his shirt off? We've already filmed all the werewolf stuff. Forget it. Never mind.
It's fine.
It's fine.
I think another element that I do enjoy about this film is it kind of opens as a mystery almost, because Larry is returning home because his brother had died, kind of maybe a little mysteriously, but they say it's like a hunting accident, I think, and I always felt like, was that supposed to be a wolf thing, or was that supposed to be something else? But as the story goes on, they kind of go, okay, now he's a werewolf. Like, we're not thinking about that anymore.
That's true. It does seem like a setup that never
pays off.
Yeah. But and then I think the other thing is, like, Larry is so, like, kind of, like, American, and his dad is so, like, British. Like, it's very, like, how do they... And then he has the line where he's like, oh, I've been there, for 12 years, or some long time, where it's like, okay, so you never had your accent, you lost your accent. I don't know.
I guess it's kind of like, you ever see the Christopher Nolan and his brother Jonathan Nolan?
Oh, does one have an accent, the other doesn't?
Christopher Nolan is Sir Christopher Nolan,
yeah,
right? And so you hear him talk, and he talks all proper. He's like, shooting on film, and then you hear Jonathan Nolan, who you swore grew up in like Santa Monica. Like, I kid you not, he looks like a traditional like middle-aged guy with like long hair and scruffy beard, and Nolan looks like a British dude who should be called Sir Christopher Nolan. Yeah. So no, that's the case. Wow. I almost was gonna go, that's weird, and then I realized, right, the Nolan brothers.
They're the modern day Talbots.
That's literally the modern day Talbots.
But that is the other thing, is that Claude Rains, says at one point, like, oh, I feel like there's a curse on the Talbot men or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, that's a good, like, foreshadowing. That's kind of a good setup there. But it doesn't really feel like it pays off, because, it is a curse, because he ends up having to kill his son with a silver cane. Like, it's really, like, horrific. Mm-hmm. This is one of those ones where it's the things that they're not showing you that are like really horrifying. It's like because it's the same thing where Larry has to beat the werewolf with the cane. It's like you're imagining that, like you're seeing him like lift the cane, and that is like then your imagination fills in like, oh God, he's beating this thing to death. Yeah. As far as horrifying scenes in Universal Monsters movies go,
I think that's always such a positive consequence of like film censorship and the rules of decency is that it did allow so much space for our brains to fill in the blanks, and we can often invent things that are so much scarier than a movie can show us.
yeah.
No, I agree, and maybe we kind of like take for granted a little bit of the when it's a horror film, it's an R-rated, you can go as intense and scary. Then you watch these older movies, and sometimes you're like, wait, that's a little bit more effective. In like weird sidetrack, but like I'm doing my Twin Peaks rewatch right now, and the show was like a network television show for the 1990s, so it obviously wasn't made for premium network, it wasn't made for HBO or anything like that. So it was still a network television show, but yet the show is still effectively as creepy or as intense as if David Lynch and Mark Frost were allowed to go all in on the really dark tones. Your imagination fills in the gap, and I kind of feel like I like it better that it's the network stuff. In this, I'm looking forward to watching the Showtime revival, but then it's Showtime, so that means Lynch and them will be going more all in on those darker tones, but I think it's way more effective that I was able to just let myself think of those darker tones in the network parameters. And so I agree. I think there is a little bit more of like just trusting your audience's own imagination to steer the heck out of it.
And then you have an opportunity to sit with it more and ponder
Right.
and think, well, maybe it's this, well, maybe it's like that. Versus once you see it, maybe you have that scare or that thrill in the moment, but it's going to pass sooner because you know everything's answered for you.
No, true.
I don't know if you're familiar. This reminds me of the Val Lewton films from that time, from that era, like the 40s, where I watched a bunch of them last October just because they were like the kind of an answer to Universal Monsters, but none of them were actually like Universal Monsters. They were all very like in the realm of like psychological horror. So it's like the cat people and the leopard man, but it's like a man doesn't turn into a leopard, but it's kind of like people act, they're like, oh, there is a man who turns into a leopard. Like they talk about it and then you never actually see it. It never like pays. But what happens in that movie is there's a lot of like those kinds of movies. It is a lot of like shadow work. It is a lot of like what you're not seeing. And I think, people do think of Universal as like they show you everything because you see the monster, you see the whole monster, but it is like some of the more horrifying parts are left to our imagination.
Right.
Yeah, fascinating.
I kind of want to put a preemptive pin on this one interesting theming of the relationship between the parents and child. It's something that it's not very obvious in this movie. I don't even think it's intentional in this movie, but it's something I can't help but notice in the other Wolfman movies.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are ways you can step into, I guess, that parent-son theming in the first Wolfman. But I know from Kurt Siodmak's perspective, at least, he was Jewish. He was from Germany. When he wrote this, he'd fled Germany, I think, first to the UK, then to California. And he says that he wrote the Wolfman sort of as a story, somebody whose fate is cursed by forces beyond his control. So it had to do with, fleeing. Okay. So yes, there are ways that we can find that parent-child relationship dynamic, but I don't think that was his first and foremost intention.
And I believe that. And it's something that I put a pin on because I find it fascinating because other iterations of the story, specifically tied to Universal, see that as a thing to explore. But this one, I totally think that's definitely the case. I don't really... as the movie was going, I was trying to see, did I miss something the last time I watched it? And the answer is no. It's pretty straightforward, but it is telling that every other writer who's explored this concept looked at the father-son relationship and went, there's something there.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about Lon Chaney's performance, though. What did everyone feel about that?
I think it's good. I think that he does a really good job of playing somebody who's kind of plagued by this curse. I think that in his own life, he faced so many demons and he struggled so much. And I think he brings a certain amount of that to this movie. I think that there are other, when he plays Alucard and some of those characters, I think sometimes he's miscast. Like I hear the word corn-fed a lot. He does have that very all-American vibe to him.
Yeah.
But in the Wolfman specifically, that works because he wasn't, he wasn't born a monster. He wasn't made a monster. He now is plagued by becoming one.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Specifically at the scene back at the Gwen shop, right? He's already just scared out of his mind. He's worried he's going to hurt more people, maybe also possibly even kill Gwen. And I felt like that's my favorite performance of his in the whole film. It was like that one. I felt like, oh yeah, this is someone who is struggling and worried about his well-being and everyone else's well-being, but also I don't know how to stop this, and I can't go near the people I love because I don't know how to stop this.
I think the movie does well to start with him in a very, he's very jovial.
Yeah.
He's very, when he meets Gwen, he's very, joking around. He's having, even with his dad, he's he's a little more light. And then to have, when this, curse happens to him, it makes him go full introspective where he's thinking, how is this happening? How can I stop this? What can be done? But you see the range of it, where he goes from, it's not just he was brooding from the beginning. That would that would be a little boring. And so they give him time to be happy and then time to be very sad.
You get the full arc of his character.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when you come to the tragedy of the ending, right? Because it's Claude Rains killing his own son, and also though he does get bit. And I was wondering, do we linger on that? No, no, moves over.
They don't even look. I'll tell you, I did for the first time watch Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, which is the follow up to this, and that doesn't come back. Claude Rains. What they do instead is Lon Chaney Jr. somehow comes back from the dead. That's just they open his grave and he's like, well, I'm awake now. Which is fair. This is where the Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street gets it from, where it's just yeah, they're back. Yeah, we killed him, but they're back.
That sad, the woman who's telling him oh, he can finally rest. And I remember watching it. No, he won't.
He's got to go through a couple more.
Fun fact though, I think Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is one of the first cinematic universes, or the creation of the cinematic universe where you have this movie crossover. So I think now to when we have all of our Marvel and DC and all of these crossover movies, and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was the first to do it.
And which is really, we kind of take that for granted because you know about it. Even if you're a horror fan, you sort of do know about that, but in the world where we're currently at, where everybody was trying for a very, very, very long time to make their cinematic universes, and it's just really no, we've been doing that. We just didn't have a name for that back then. And it's also funny, look, we said before the show started with The Mummy 2017, and I love mildly ragging on the Dark Universe every once in a while because it was such a very we are so planned.
It was a bold statement.
I wanted to love the Dark Universe, obviously so bad. I wanted it to be fantastic, but it was so clear that it was just a straight money grab, and they weren't really thinking about its roots or the fans or anything like that. They were like, how can we just piece these things together like little Lego blocks and whatever, throw it out to the world.
Multiple people that I talked to about the 2017 Mummy, I said, oh yeah, and it's a remake of the old Mummy, and they're like, it's a remake? They were like, that's connected somehow? They couldn't even understand that because it's so removed, like you're saying, it's so removed from what people associate with the Mummy.
Yeah. Well, and they were trying to make some weird Jekyll and Hyde through line through all the films.
It's and I always think back on the big promotional photo of here's our A-star cast who's going to be in these movies, and I just went, you haven't even made sure the first one worked. We don't even know if people like the first one, and I think the only bummer of those movies, I'm a little oh, I would have liked to have known what that would have been like as Bill Condon's Bride film, because I know Bill Condon has such a love and respect for Universal Studios monsters, and
he did Gods and Monsters, right?
That's exactly.
Great movie.
And clearly his love for James Whale shows in that movie. So I was like, that's the only one I had any
And
interest in.
Angelina Jolie was supposed to be the bride.
Supposedly.
That
Who
was, yeah.
I love, but there was a big piece of me where I think back to the original movies, and a lot of times they were picking people who were a little more unknown, and they were really, right, like Bela Lugosi was really getting his start in Dracula. He had to beg for that role. He was the last person that they wanted for it. And Boris Karloff was a nobody going into Frankenstein, right? They're sort of plucking these unknowns and molding them into stars or creating stars out of them. I didn't think that we needed to put somebody like Tom Cruise or Angelina Jolie in these movies. As much as I love Angelina Jolie, like I would love to, I don't know how to word it, have a blank slate of a person who's an incredible actor who makes a name for themselves in these movies.
And it's so funny because, like, obviously they were trying to chase the Marvel train. And the irony of what you're pointing out is that's what they did.
Right.
Like, they sort of, like, no one knew who Chris Hemsworth was. You know, Chris Evans was known, but not A+. Robert Downey was coming out of...
Even Tom Hiddleston, I would say.
No one knows who Tom Hiddleston is.
Yeah, and then he was Loki, and everyone was like, well, we love him.
Yeah.
We want him in everything.
Yeah, that's part of how you know that there was no authenticity to what they were doing, because they themselves didn't rely on whatever scripts or movies they were putting together. They said just slap a big name on it, call it a day.
Exactly. So no, like, and that's going back on track to the original, what original Universal was like. They were just sort of figuring this out as they went along, clearly, and like deciding that like let's start combining the characters is clearly, hey, look, let's not lie. That's clearly money making idea too, but there was something about it where at least like, well, we never tried that. Let's give that a go.
Well, and that part of it came so much later, right? These movies start back in 1931. It's not until the 40s that you're getting these crossovers.
Right. I even think the as we were pointing out earlier, the original idea of these, not even a crossover, but it's like you liked those actors as those characters. Well, here they are as different characters. You know, Claude Rains was the Invisible Man. Here he is as the father in this. You know,
Boris Karloff was Frankenstein's monster. Then of course he was the mummy himself.
Right. Yeah. It's so that was kind of the linking part, was that these actors were so good as whatever you saw them as first. Now let's give them a try at a different monster. Let's give them a try at a different role in the monster universe. Let's see how they do.
Totally. And Boris and Bela got paired up together in so many scary movies together, but because they had proven themselves to be so effective in those scary roles.
Yes.
So then you get things like The Raven, The Black Cat, those incredible films.
To wrap up thoughts on
Wolfman.
let's go back to the Wolfman.
Yeah.
Like general feelings on the actual movie itself. Like what do you think is your kind of overall?
I do think if we're comparing Universal monsters, I can't help but hold like Creature to a high standard, high pedestal. Frankenstein, Dracula. Wolfman does feel he feels like, which is funny. He feels like the C tier, even though he's not. Like he is so high up, but it's almost to make that Marvel connection again. It's like Iron Man was not the most popular comic book character, but he's solid. And then when you give him to a good person to play him, like, you'll love it. So as we were talking about, like, werewolves in general, for me and Antonio, we're like, whatever on werewolves. But when you have Lon Chaney do it, it's like, oh yeah, that's a cool take. He's elevating kind of the werewolf idea.
Yeah. Antonio?
Yeah, werewolves, not my favorite monster. It's not the best film at, let's say, building the suspense. It's not the best film kind of at anything. When I know, but knowing the intention of Kurt Siodmak in writing it, knowing some of that behind the scenes stuff, and seeing Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance in the film, it's a good film, but it's just not going to be the one that I rewatch over and over and over again. It's
funny, kind of like, and as someone who like the werewolf lore is a personal favorite, even I go, yeah, but also werewolves in movies I'm not crazy about, ironically. And I do agree that, yeah, like this, every time I rewatch this, I'm like, not one of my favorites. It doesn't, like everything you pointed out, Tony, it's like, it doesn't build up the same way, but the stuff you were pointing out, Andrew, that elevates it, I completely agree. But also, like, I'm not going to pop that one in when I'm in the mood for, like, I want a Universal monster feel today. I'm going to go watch Bride or, a James Whale's Universal monster movie or Dracula, something.
But also, as you mentioned, it's only 70 minutes, so everybody should watch it at least once.
At least once.
But then you don't have to watch it again.
That's like an episode of a TV show plus 10 minutes. You're fine.
The when he shows up in the Abbott and Costello series, I think he really shines too, because they let him be funny. Like they let him Lon Chaney be funny as the Wolfman.
I want to say that Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time. Yeah, because
it's not just Frankenstein; it's Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and Dracula. They all show up.
Yeah.
I just watched that. I mean, I guess maybe 6 months ago now, but at the Old Town Music Hall in El Segundo. So I got the opportunity to see it on the big screen. There were kids in the audience, and it was so cool seeing it that way, seeing what was probably the entree into the monsters for all of these kids that probably never watched them before. Yeah. And that was a really fun way to see the movie.
I also kind of similar, not at that theater. I want to go to that theater though. I've been meaning
to. It's the best.
I can't wait. I went to go watch it at the Draft House in LA, afternoon showing with a friend, and same deal, room mostly of kids. And it's amazing to me how that movie, one, still works with an audience. Two, works with kids. And it's still, like, yeah, I agree. That is a great, safe gateway for kids to maybe try out classic comedy, but also those characters. And you get a good dose of those characters in that movie. And they're hilarious, but still scary. There's still that terror that's in those characters. And the movie is that really great blend of the two. So, no. Yeah, watch Wolfman. Didn't go watch Abbott Costello Meets Frankenstein. I would highly recommend those too.
Yeah, I think that's the better follow-up than what Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Where Frankenstein shows up more than halfway through. It's more like the Wolfman meets Frankenstein. Yeah.
Bella's the monster in that one?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is funny because he was him and Lon Chaney just hanging out.
They're just buddies. Yeah. I'm glad he got to be Dracula though with Chaney at least. At least
yes.
That's nice. You know?
They rotated around.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, I mean, it's a solid movie.
It's a solid movie, and I think it's 70 minutes too, so it both means there's not much we can talk about outside of what we just said. So let's take a little break from this topic castle. Come back, and then we'll meet up with another transforming father-son situation after this break.
To all who come to this happy podcast, welcome.
Anna Musings are your musings.
Here age relives fond memories of the past.
And here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future.
Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Kayla.
And if it wasn't readily apparent from that, we're huge nerds about Disney. That's why we're doing the Anna Musings podcast.
Once a month, we'll sit down and talk about a film in detail from the Walt Disney Animation Studios filmography, covering them in chronological order, from Snow White to Moana and beyond.
To Moana and beyond!
Sweetie, we're not doing Pixar yet. We'll do that after.
And that's going to be a long time coming. Anyway, if that sounds up your alley, come join Kayla and I, and maybe a guest or two, as we explore the Disney animated canon, film by film.
With the hope that it'll be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world.
Ooh, nicely said.
Don't thank me, thank Walt.
All right, well, we are watching the moon and watching our backs here in the smoggy LA. Looking out for any Wolfmans.
That's not fog, this is smog?
Yeah.
Terrible.
The LA version of Wolfman has smog. For sure. Check out the Patreon, patreon.com/nothingnew. In fact, we have a new episode perfectly themed with this episode, and here's a little sample of that right now.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's here's the funny thing. Within the last couple of years, I've noticed that there is a bit of a more of a growing support for this movie.
That's so bizarre.
I sort of get it. I kind of get it.
When I sat down to watch this movie, I thought to myself, I might love this. I really had that thought where I was like, the last time I saw this, I really didn't like it, but I wasn't as entrenched in Wolfman lore.
Right.
I was like, maybe I'm gonna really enjoy this, really soak it up. But
yeah,
nah, I don't know. I didn't.
Same vibe, same feeling this time, exactly.
Yeah, just kind of whatever.
I think my recent viewings is me going, is like, again, much like the 2025, it's like there is stuff here I actually legitimately like a lot, but you can get that episode and a whole library of episodes specifically just for the Patreon for just $1 a month. We do episodes, sometimes like extra episodes that are connected to the show. We do other movie reviews. We do pitches of remakes that we throw at each other and see what we can come up with. But if you pay $25 for 1 month, we can give the control of the show to you, and you can decide on the movie remake combo that we have to cover. And we've got some really great episodes that came out of that.
We did King Kong because of that.
One of our best episodes, by far.
One of our best favorite. Like we always
bring that episode because we both think it's really good. It's
did Muppets and Mickey's Christmas Carol together. That was a
Power Rangers happened.
Yep.
And then Ninja Turtles.
Yep.
So those are all episodes from Patreon. And if you want that control, just give us $25 and we'll do what you say. Now that we're back, I'm still checking on the moon and I still feel itchy. My teeth feel sharper. Anyway, let me throw it back to you, Antonio. Folks, where can they find you and the work you do?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on YouTube. My channel's called Universally Me, or you could look it up by my name, Antonia Carlotta, youtube.com/Antonia Carlotta. I'm always doing deep dives on Universal history, classic horror, all the fun stuff. So.
And I actually referenced your channel when we did the Invisible Man episode.
Oh my gosh, what an honor.
It was because you brought up the fact that, technically speaking, he had the highest body count.
Yes. Yeah, he's the most dangerous of the monsters in many ways.
Yeah.
And perhaps the scariest, really.
Mm-hmm. So this is a good circle of close situation because that was back in January or February 2020. Yeah. So here you are now on the show.
Yeah. Oh, and also for people in the LA area, I will be introducing 2 movies at the Old Town Music Hall soon.
Oh,
so
nice.
I'll be introducing Dracula's Daughter in April and The Hunchback of Notre Dame in May.
Wow.
So.
Awesome. That's great. I think that's kind of it. We're ready to jump back into Universal's 2025 revival of the Wolfman. And once again, it's funny that, of course, I brought up the Invisible Man. This is a coming of circle situation because this is, in fact, the follow-up film of the Invisible Man remake director, Lee Winnell. If you don't know Lee Winnell, very famously for co-creating the Saw films, specifically the first one, has gone on to also co-create Insidious, and The Conjuring? No, not The Conjuring. I don't think he did. Just James Wan's The Conjuring.
Yeah.
Correct.
But he went off to start directing his own films. Specifically, I'm a big fan of his movie Upgrade, which I really love. It's like a cool sci-fi action, Paul Verhoeven vibey thing. But then he went on to make The Invisible Man in 2020, which we said some good things about back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, took The Invisible Man in a whole new direction.
Yeah.
I remember we were a little torn on that idea, but we did in the end like it because it was telling like a very modern version that worked in today's world.
Yeah. What'd you think of that?
I loved that new Invisible Man remake. Now, it probably was easy to impress me after The Mummy in 2017.
Yeah.
Anything would have been better.
Sure.
But I think that all of the things that I wanted from this dark universe, where it was these monster movies with a message behind them that were just really good movies, right? It didn't need to be a big budget. It didn't need to be crazy action, just like good, suspenseful, good movies.
Yeah.
I felt like The Invisible Man was that. And I think because that movie did so well, and I think it could have done better if COVID didn't hit like right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But because that movie did so well, I think that's why Universal started leaning into these monster movies again.
Yeah. And like kind of focusing on a little bit smaller scale. Yeah, I think that was gonna not to keep wrapping in the.
Yeah, you don't need a $300 million Tom Cruise action film.
Yeah, I didn't need a giant unnecessary airplane sequence.
No, and that's not exactly what the original monster movies were anyway.
Right.
It wasn't about throwing billions of dollars into it. It was about making just a good movie.
Yeah, agreed. And I won't go too much into it, but this Wolfman did have a wild production history. So yes, at one point Lee Winnell was gonna direct the film in 2020. It was announced late 2020 with Ryan Gosling
Right.
set to play the Wolfman. And apparently, to put this simply, he had a pitch that Universal liked. And that pitch was what they were developing between 2020 and 2024. That was the movie they were going to make. And from what I could tell after doing some research, the pitch was, it was going to, from like, I think the concept was that he would have been playing an anchorman who gets bit by a werewolf. And the movie was being compared tonally to Nightcrawler.
Okay.
The Jake Gyllenhaal film from 2013. So I think we were probably going to get some sort of movie that maybe was doing commentary on sensationalism news, maybe a bit of comedy because he hired some writers from Orange is the New Black to make it a dark comedy, and for one reason or another, it all fell through. And
I really want to see that version.
I'm curious about that version.
What
for
fascinates
sure.
me about that is I feel like Ryan Gosling was attached to the Haunted Mansion film for
Yeah.
a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, he wants to be in horror. Let him be in a horror movie. God, and that was when Guillermo del Toro was going to do
That's
Haunted
right.
Mansion. It's like Guillermo del Toro and Ryan Gosling went to Disneyland. Like, there's pictures of them at Disneyland, and I'm like, what did they talk about? Like, please, like what happened there? Like, why didn't that happen? And now this, and I'm like,
Let Gosling be spooky.
let him
Yes.
be spooky.
Hashtag let Gosling be spooky.
They keep going, no, never mind. And I mean, with the Anchorman angle and comparing it to Nightcrawler, that's like another
Loved
totally
Nightcrawler.
different. Yeah, totally so
Love that.
different.
Yeah.
That would be so cool.
No, and it sounded like a movie with a message and a theme. That I'm like, that's fascinating. All that went out the window when Gosling left the project completely, and Universal went back to.
He's
Winnow.
still like an executive producer or something, right?
Yeah, because obviously they dumped so much money into into the production of it, that even though nothing, as we've clearly watched the film, nothing of that thing I've suggested is in this movie at all. Except the idea that maybe one character is a journalist. I just realized that.
Right.
But it's not addressed in the narrative. We're not. It's not
She's
really.
just a busy career woman.
Busy career woman is the only thing we got out of that. But yeah, no, like everything else clearly started from ground up with Lee Winnell, and they made this iteration of the film. And so even though I'm totally with you, I would have loved to have seen that version. I had hopes because I love His Invisible Man, and you know the trailers were intense and interesting. And I went, okay, maybe. Then let's go ahead and jump right into it.
Well, I also want to talk also about expectations, because going into this, I had read like some quote where Lee Winnell was like, "We looked at the original Wolfman and we said we're doing everything opposite." Like there was some quote where I was like, "Uh-oh, that's not the way you should be looking at this." Like there are some things that are salvageable. Like you can carry that on. So I think going into this, I was very worried. I was like, oh, this is just going to be its own thing. Like, it's going to have no connection, no, like, heart or soul or through line to the original Wolfman.
Yeah, it won't ruin a film for me not to. I respect everybody having their own separate vision. So that in itself, I think I had high expectations because I do like Lee Winnell. I do like Saw, I loved Invisible Man, right? I think he made choices. And some individual moments worked, but the movie as a whole didn't pay off for me. But I guess I'd rather a choice than no choice. And it's not that I think he didn't try.
I agree. Elements, I think, are like, that's a cool idea. And I think is even executed well. But as a narrative.
Correct.
So,
But it's so hard. This whole movie is contained to a few hours. It's hard to pull that kind of film off. I can't think of too many that do it really well. So, he set him, he had a high bar to meet.
so to kind of summarize this version of
Yes.
Wolfman, what is the character's name?
Blake.
Because they don't use
not
the character
Talbot.
names.
They're
No
not
Talbot,
No.
no Larrys here.
No.
But yeah, Blake. So it's Christopher Abbott and Julia Garner play a couple with a daughter, and as we kind of mentioned, Julia Garner's character is a journalist, but she just kind of. There's one scene where I really thought, I was like, is she supposed to be a lawyer? Because she like walked out of a building with a bunch of colleagues and they were all dressed so nice. I was like, That's not. I came up in journalism a little bit. We don't dress like that.
I just had to suspend my disbelief of her being like a grown up with a 10-year-old or
She does look so young.
that was when I first saw the trailer. For most of it, I thought that she was a kid, a teen in the family.
Yes.
I have to agree. I had to do a lot of like, how old is Julia?
And she's a fantastic actress.
Yes.
Like, I think she's wonderful, but I think she may have been a little miscast.
Yes, I kind of agree with that.
But so that's the little family unit. But we get
Yes.
we get the backstory of Blake and that his dad his dad was a hunter and he hunted with his dad and learned how to live like that. But then there's like this prologue with this glimpse of a wolfman.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever's going on there, but then we jump ahead 30 years to the present day, and that's where most of the story takes place, where now the dad has passed, and they're going to go live in the farmhouse for the summer.
Yeah, because they're having marital problems,
Yeah.
etc.
This will help them reconnect.
Yeah, and then they have to take care of his dad's house and affairs and etc.
But of course, on the way there, everything goes wrong.
Right. I have to admit, I think my warning flags for, oh no, this movie isn't really working for me, is that prologue.
Mhm.
That prologue felt extremely long,
Yeah.
and I just felt like I don't know what it was. It's just like I had a hard time really connecting to it. Like something about it where I'm like, I don't know Blake enough as a character, even as a child, to feel one way or another about him. And then his father is so obviously just very like rude and neat, like just very rough with him in the beginning. Where I'm like, it's very one dimensional at the moment, and then it's well shot. But yeah,
One-dimensional is a great way to word it, and I just felt like so much was like really on the nose.
Yeah.
A lot of things were just thrown in our face versus letting us uncover them.
which is the opposite of like Invisible Man, because I felt like he kind of like some of it is on the nose, but in a good way. But a lot of it is just like I was learning about it while watching. Here, it's like
The beginning scene of Invisible Man is like has stuck with me forever. Like where she's escaping like the compound. Like it's very like, oh, like you're into it immediately. You're on her side. You even if you don't know everything that's going on, you fully understand. With this beginning of the Wolfman, it's like I think like 5 minutes I was like, is he gonna grow up to be our main character? Like I wasn't even sure. I was like, or is this kid gonna die here and that's gonna lead into the story? I have no idea.
By the way, is this supposed to be a spoiler-free podcast?
go ahead.
I think from the trailer probably, but from the moment that he gets like the "your dad is dead" letter,
Yeah.
I was like, his dad's the werewolf.
Right.
His dad's the
right.
werewolf.
Oh
Yeah.
my god. Okay, so yes, all three of us thought that. Great.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the letter for me, but it was definitely when they crashed the car and he was just standing there. I was like, well, he's at the farmhouse. Like, that's him.
And I sort of mildly suspected even before the letter, where it's just how intense the father was. Then I'm like, is he gonna be the Wolfman that he meets? And then it's funny. The moment I thought that, I went, because that's what happened in the remake in 2010. that Anthony Hopkins is the Wolfman. Wait. Oh man, did I figure this out like 20 minutes in? I did figure this out like 20 minutes in. And that's not a good thing.
No. No.
And I mean, once they get going, they crash the car. It's like that's exciting enough, but it is like there's like only a couple of like good set pieces where you're like, oh yeah, like this is thrilling and exciting, and then it's kind of a lot of nothing is happening. Yeah.
I won't stress. I personally like Christopher Abbott's performance.
Yeah.
I think he's a much like Chaney Jr. I think he's a great center of the movie. I really feel like he made me care about Blake as a character, and like his scenes with his daughter, I think, are really great. So his pain I was feeling, and I think he's like a wonderful fit to the story they were trying to tell. As we kind of agree that Julie Gardner might have been miscast, Christopher, I think, is a great center of this movie, and if there's anything that works, it's stuff that's surrounding him.
And I think part of what makes him work so well is there are these long sequences with no dialogue, but when it's with him, I was enthralled. I was like, oh my god, like what? Like once he starts turning and he starts figuring that out, I'm like, oh my God, what's he gonna do? What's gonna happen with him? But then once it would change perspective to be with his wife and his daughter, I tapped out. I was like, I'm not, I want to see what he's doing.
Yeah, and maybe that is the writing. Maybe that's not the actors. Like maybe they weren't given enough to do or to work with, but you're right. Like he was built out so well, and I loved the idea of seeing things through his perspective.
I love that.
That's probably my favorite part of the whole movie is getting that, and that's what like a lot of times would almost make me feel uneasy or like my stomach was starting to hurt as things were warping. And
well, the creepiest scene is when he hears the spider.
Oh my God, that's so good.
Because you're like, what is he hearing? Like, what is he about to see? And then he opens the closet door and it's just a spider, but it's huge, first of all. And it's like every footstep is like pounding. And it's like, why is he hearing it like that? It's like, that's so creepy.
This idea of kind of focusing on his side of the transformation, I think, is the best thing in the whole movie, and it's the most unique thing I've seen in a werewolf movie. Like, let's see it from their perspective, and I think it's the scene where Julie Gardner is like kind of burying her heart as he's in bed. Is one of the most heartbreaking scenes because she's laying it out, and then we get to that transition of seeing it on his side. He doesn't understand a word of it, but he speaks in clean English. I don't know what you're saying. And I'm like, oh, that really hit me. He wants to hear her, and he clearly wants her to hear him, but he knows something's blocking the communication, and that is just creating more isolation for him. And I'm like, that's great. I don't know how you can make more of that in the whole movie, but like, that's some of the best stuff in the film is this unique perspective of the transformation.
Definitely. And then the dad shows up.
Yeah. And then again, I'm like, hey, look, if you want to hear our Patreon, we do talk about this movie, but I'm like, I'm doing this again. I'm seeing Werewolf Dad versus Werewolf Son in their home, except it's not a big palatial mansion. It is now in their small townhouse in Oregon or whatever. And I'm like, how is this happening again? I don't know.
Oh, the movie does open with its own kind of version of the rhyme, but it's not a rhyme. It's just like a story, right? About how, there's like a known disease in this mountain area where they call it the face of the wolf.
And like,
yeah, you're saying, because it's like,
we're not doing
that in there.
We're not doing curses this time.
Yeah.
No full moon, no pentagons, none of that. We're just, this is.
But I was like, I don't know why they need to like. I think they had to put that there because there's nothing else in the movie. Like they didn't put the work in to just make that a part of the movie. So they're like, we'll just put this little disclaimer at the beginning.
There's no one there to explain the lore.
Well,
so they have to
The opportunity for that is in that prologue. You see the dad has all of this equipment and he's like radioing someone and he's like, I saw the thing, I saw the creature. And then when they get to the house later, that's all dismantled. They go down into the basement and none of it's there. And I'm thinking, if they had left some of it up, and Julia Garner is supposed to be a journalist, she could look at it and figure it out. And that would explain why all of a sudden she knows how to do everything in the entire universe. Because as the movie went on, she not only was she like the opposite of a person in a horror movie, where she knew exactly how to do every single thing, like even taking the battery out to the car, knowing that she would have to jump the car. I was like, who would think of that in this time of distress?
Right.
You're being attacked by two monsters, and you're like, well, I better get a battery and some cables and get out there and charge the car. And it's like, what? Why would you? You would just run out there and fail.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk the design of the creature this time, the werewolf this time. Now, if you remember the online uproar. When the early, it was a Universal, it was for Halloween Horror Nights, right? Like there was an early creature look design, which I guess is the dad in hindsight, who showed up online. And let's be 100% clear, it was a theme park version of the creature effect.
It was a theme park photo op.
It was a theme park photo op. So I was giving it that grace, but everyone freaked out. Like, that's what it's gonna look like, and everyone's going, no, well, no. And I'm like, and I was watching. I bet you that's not actually Christopher Abbott's werewolf, that's probably the one that bites him. But also, this is the angle we're going with. Like, what does that mean when he gets bit properly? And the answer is, like, something... They mentioned The Fly, like, a lot in this. The Fly remake as inspirations for the movie. And, like, the more body horror element. And as I was looking at the design, I went, oh, I see it. I don't know if I love it, but I see what you're saying. It's like a weird melding of like a melted werewolf flesh human hybrid thing. And I don't know if I love it, but I see what they're going for.
Well, and that came through in that scene where he bites his arm.
That scene got me when his teeth come out, and then when he's like biting his arm and scratching at himself. Some of that stuff did give me the ick in the right way.
Correct. No.
So that was done well. I think I just wanted a different story. I wanted to see, yes, like the pain of his transformation and losing grip with reality and all of that, but then I wanted to see more of like the journey and the wolf in the world and the moon, or I wanted more of that stuff. And
I think that's sort of maybe one of the big narrative issues with the film. It's like outside of him dealing with the pain and then like this, treating it like a disease, there isn't much left to the narrative.
Mm-mm.
Like the family stuff kind of gets put aside because he's a monster now, so we have to...
the big thing there, right, is that he cares about his daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
They're kind of playing with the idea of, instead of it being a loved one, a wife, or whatever, it's actually literally it's father to son and then father to daughter. Like that's the lineage.
So I was trying to, and like this is one of those things where I'm gonna have to ruminate on it for a while, because I was like, well, I guess at the beginning it's father son, but they mirror it at the end with mother daughter.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I think that there might be more even. Obviously, there's this like generational trauma. There's father like parent child relationships, but I didn't actually think that it was his relationship with his daughter in the end. I think it's the mom somehow coming around and being different to her. I think
that's part of the disconnect. I think that's part of where it loses what actually the meaning is of what happened.
Yeah, they didn't necessarily, at least for me, like Julia Garner wasn't quite built up enough for me to care about her a great deal. So then, it was lost on me at the end.
I think that's a good thing to kind of bring up, because it's like, it's very clear that Blake has a strong connection with his kid, but Julia Garner does not, or she's losing connection with her kid. If the movie was focused better on reflecting Blake's father's relationship with him and Julia's relationship with her daughter as a kind of a mirror, then the ending where they literally repeat the events of the Watchtower would kind of make more thematic sense. It would be extremely on the nose. It was already on the nose even right now, to be honest. But at least thematically, I can see the closure of that. But here, because we barely got to understand Julia's character, I think that's why we're all kind of like, so what are we doing here again? Is the vibe of this film is like, I'm supposed to be following, and we follow Blake a lot. Like, that's the thing. Blake is so much of the narrative that to switch it to Julia being the protag at the end doesn't feel like it's earned, because I'm not connecting with her right away.
You're saying that. I wonder if at some point they considered her to be the Wolfman, because that would have almost narratively made that balance strike better.
It would have been interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't, we didn't go there, did we?
We didn't go there, no. Is
it weird? I'm going back to when the father does come back as the Wolfman, and we're all like, okay, I figured. But but is that the part where I'm just like, that feels tonally inconsistent with everything else as well? It just seems like this weird action scene that, like, why am I watching this right now?
It felt like a non-event to me, which knowing that was supposed to be like a reveal or the reveal, I was like, that like there's no payoff here. I guess they had done it well, even if I knew when the letter arrived that the father was going to be the Wolfman, I guess if they had done it well or built it up right, then it could still be a powerful moment. But it just felt like, that's what we know.
Like, no, I was right.
I think another thing that hurts the film is there are so many moments where I think we as the audience understand what's going on. We're like ahead of the movie. And then Julia Garner has to turn to the daughter and say, well, here's what's happening. Like, there were so many moments where that was happening. And I was like, we don't need you to explain. Like, you're experiencing it as we are, and we're understanding it, so we know that you are. Like, where she says, "Oh, it looks like it was his dad who was sick with this sickness first." I was like, you didn't need to say that. Even the ending, it's like that's such a traumatic ending of this daughter has to watch her mom shoot her dad.
Yeah.
And then, but they throw in this like little line where the daughter's like, I can't remember how she says it, but it's like he wants it to end.
Yeah.
And it's almost like in that moment we're supposed to believe the daughter understands the dad wants to be killed.
It's got to be because, like, right, she can read his mind. She knows what he's thinking. I'm sure that they were trying to. I think they were trying to build something bigger there.
I totally think that was the intent, right? That's why they kept doing.
But I don't think the execution worked.
It's a lot of. I wouldn't say it's first draft ideas. I think it's just a lot of like ideas that like they just forgot or didn't or got lost in the writing. Of, like,
I almost feel like it's like textbook. They were like, okay, well, we need to hit these notes or these points, and so they hit those, but then the in between stuff to get from point to point, they didn't build out enough.
Yeah,
I think that's what happened.
So
we have the reveal, we have the inciting incident, we have those things, but the in between just never got done.
That's the answer.
Now, what I think is funny, everyone that I've talked to who's also seen this movie, they really don't like it. But I almost want to give it that little credit because it tried. It really did try at certain points. When it was going into his perspective and all that, I was like, well, they're trying. At least I can see the evidence that they
It's true. It's so easy to talk about what didn't work, but you're right. Like there's so much where it was like, wow, that was really inventive. That was creative. That was cool. That was interesting. This, I will say, like, the thing with the windshield wiper scare, I thought actually was like really fun, except I had seen it in the trailer.
I wish it wasn't in the trailer. Yeah,
but
it's a good reveal, but we saw it already.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of good stuff in it. It's just easier to lean in sometimes to like, well.
But I'm super agreeing on the idea that, like, as a fan of like the werewolf lore and etc., I'm going, but there is good stuff. Like, it's hard, and I can tell, like, even cinematographer, I was like, there's some great shots. It's really well filmed. It's really well shot. There's the lighting's incredible. There's one shot it's in the trailer, but I like it where it looks like Blake is just being shut off from the world and all the lights are coming off, but except for him. I'm like, that's great. That's great stuff. And like, it's so, I don't know. It's like, for me, it's like, I applaud, it's easier to crap on a movie, but I also applaud, and I'm like, yeah, but clearly there's talented people making this. They can't always connect everything. You do have films that just go, like, was it an old, there's an old quote from somebody I remember where it's like, they're talking about like a filmmaker they like. Oh, it was like De Palma is a filmmaker they were a big fan of, and they love watching every Brian De Palma film except for, and even when it's a bad Brian De Palma film, they love watching it because only, as they quote, a hack can make it that bad. A hack can make it that bad. A genius filmmaker can make it that bad in an interesting way. I'm not saying that Lee Winnell's a genius, but I'm saying he's a talented guy with some talented people that makes interesting movies even when they're not great movies. And this is one of those cases where it's like, yeah, no, this is a miss, but it's not forgettable. There's stuff in here that's very interesting.
And so many modern horror movies, I complain about this often, they just end up very gray and drab and bland visually, and this movie did not fall into that category for me. I thought there were a lot of like vibrant colors and, like you said, cool shots and all of these things that do make it more memorable and that made it beautiful to watch, even if, the script wasn't beautiful.
Right. No, like the shot of the kind of in between clouds, the mountains that kind of begins and ends the film. Even I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get why your dad and you were like, yeah, this is good. This is nice. This is a nice looking view. I wish I could see that view. So again, not terrible, but definitely not connected.
Well, I think even the view, they're trying to connect it when he's a kid, he's looking up at the sky and not paying attention to the world around him. And then his last moments as a wolf man, he's like looking at the sky. Like,
right.
I think they're trying, like, here's actually, and they're doing like visual things where it's like, oh yes, the American redwoods or whatever. Like, it's supposed to be very beautiful.
Yeah.
But,
Well, no, like the line he says to Julia to kind of convince him to go to the house is that like there's this like there's a special part between the mountains that you swear even when things are bad, if you look at it, like the world can't be that bad. And again, they're setting it up. They're clearly look, it's on the nose, but they're setting it up. And to end the movie that way, I went back. Oh right, because Blake said that.
I sometimes wish, like, I wish that Lee Whannell could just make this movie again. Like, we have this. There's so much good stuff to build from. Mm-hmm. He's got the notes from the people now. Right. Just try again.
Yeah, try again. Just give it like another year, develop a little bit longer, and then just go, okay, here we go.
Maybe recast Julie Garner.
Yeah,
or whatever.
And then off to the races.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard, is Lee Whannell doing another Universal after this? I have not heard, but
not that I know.
Okay.
We are in. I'm curious to know where Universal's thinking about their monster plans at this moment. Because it's like at the moment the only one who's made solid work is Lee, mm-hmm. and that's just one movie.
I can't imagine they're abandoning it because
Clearly.
we've got the Dark Universe opening up in Orlando in, I think, May or June.
Yeah.
So
soon, yeah.
They're not going to abandon the monsters because they got to build that land up and make people want to go to it. Right. But I don't think they have very solid plans right now.
Which they ever did in the beginning, so I guess hilariously that counts. But also, side note, I remember when they announced that theme park, I'm like, oh, so I guess you bought the name, so I guess you really can't change it now.
And just a side note, I'll point out they had a couple fun nods to the original monsters, even though they didn't, honor it. The sort of U-Haul that they're driving says Pierce on it, which I think is Jack Pierce. Ginger is the daughter. There's that Ginger Snaps werewolf movie, which actually is a werewolf movie that I like.
You know what? Thank you.
Those are fun, yeah.
I completely forgot about Ginger Snaps. Those are good. Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm not sure if there's more, but those are two that come to mind where I was like, oh yeah, they're making little nods to predecessors, even if they didn't follow the 1941 Wolfman at all.
They didn't use the names.
They didn't.
In Invisible Man, that he was a griffin, right? No.
Wait, was he a griffin in the Invisible Man?
I could have sworn he was.
It's been a minute.
Maybe, yeah.
It's been 5 years since I've seen it. Also, maybe Mrs. Mandela effect going on, but is Blake's green shirt echoing a little bit of the Wolfman?
I thought so.
Yeah.
I thought they were playing off of the idea of this is an American guy. They're just setting it in America now instead of having him go to London and experience it.
Yeah. I don't know. But no, it's I would say obviously it's not a disaster, but to say it's a disappointment is probably a more accurate way I feel about the movie for sure.
And Universal must have known that because they dumped it in January versus pumping a lot of money into it any other time of year. So I hope that at least there's a part from Universal's perspective where they say, well, this met the expectations that we had, and we'll give the other monsters another go.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this also kind of maybe proves a bit of a point that, even though the Wolfman is a known, character they have, and the werewolf lore is a known lore, the fact that the two attempts to try to bring the character back were both just not working is a weird sign of maybe our point earlier about there not being a ton of great werewolf movies to love the werewolf stuff. I don't know. It's hard to figure out what makes a great werewolf movie, but it's very clear that Universal, the two attempts were not the answers.
I don't think anyone could look at the 2025 Wolfman and say it's nothing.
Please rate and review Nothing New, a Remake podcast on your podcast app.
You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at NothingNewPod.
You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/nothingnnew.
Nothing New, a Remake podcast, is part of the Benview Network.